for environmental journalism and other organizations. 4 years ago, he was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in investigative reporting for exposing the role of the J. Paul Getty Museum and other American museums in the black market for looted antiquities. You did that. I remember that package up. You cited attention need for that. His first book, Chasing Aphrodite, The Hunt for Looted Antiquities at the World's Richest Museum, will be released next spring in April.
And I want you to all buy a copy, please.
Harcourt Grace?
Houghton Mifflin Harcourt is the publisher.
Okay.
They publish your textbooks, too.
Good. Sitting in the middle is Jason Song, who has covered education at the Los Angeles Times for 3 years. His work has also been recognized by the Education Writers Association. He received the Livingston Prize, which is a prize given to outstanding reporters under the age of 35.
Actually, as a finalist.
Oh, finalist? Well, even being a finalist for an award like the Livingston, which recognizes young talent in journalism, I think is a big deal. He previously worked for the Baltimore Sun and the Los Angeles Daily Journal. The gentleman seated at the far end is Doug Smith, who's been at the Times since, what, 3 decades? 4 decades.
Give or take a decade.
And the work these two men did is very important, but Doug really actually supplied the underpinning of the series by doing all the statistical work, creating the databases from which the reporting was then based on a very, very important foundation and important to long-form investigative substantive journalism. You had to have the data behind you. And so I wanted to begin our conversation. We have the series right here, and you can find it on the LA Times website under the education icon on the homepage. And it's a series of stories that examined basically the quality of teachers in the LA Unified School District. How many of you attend LAUSD schools? A fair number. And I wanted Doug to begin the conversation by talking about the statistical work that went into giving this package the backbone that it needed.
Just to be clear, I'm the database editor of the LA Times, and so my job is to do data analysis. And I often am the only person who works on a story providing data analysis and doing statistics. This case was different in that this was an exceedingly complex study that's been on the minds of academic researchers for a long time. And the analysis went beyond the scope of my own knowledge and experience. So we teamed with a researcher at RAND who did the backbreaking analysis to produce the scores for each individual teacher in school. My role was kind of the person between our researcher and the reporters, which kind of fell into 2 jobs. One was taking this information that we got from the statistician, which came in the form of z-scores. I'll bet you not too many know what a z-score is. Z-score is it's based on a standard deviation, and it's a number that would be, in this case, somewhere between -2 and +2, with 0 being the average. And we had, and each number may have 6 or 7 decimal places. So that clearly is not a very usable reporting tool. So my first job was to take these z-scores and turn them into something that we could use to make some assessments that would guide the reporting. The way we did it was to rank those in various ways and build profiles of schools to see, to try to find schools that had a high number of effective teachers or a high number of ineffective teachers. And that did lead us to some schools in particular, and then to individual teachers at those schools. And then the real hard work, believe me, was going out to those schools and talking to the principals and observing the teachers and talking to the teachers about their ratings and what they, what our observations were.
Just to give students, the young people, a sense of how long it takes for something like this, from beginning to end, the statistical part of this story. How long did it take you working with Rand? Months?
It's hard to break it into just the statistical part. There was a negotiation that went on for months to get the data. And then our researcher worked for weeks, and then we got the work, and we evaluated it ourselves, and we asked questions, and then he went back and looked at the questions and made some adjustments, and so it's still going on. It isn't over. We're still doing the same thing. So it's, I believe it'll keep me going until I retire.
Now you two actually went to the schools, and talk a little bit about that process. When I was a reporter at the New York Times, it was not easy to get into a lot of schools for a lot of different reasons, security, and a variety of other reasons. How did you do that, and how did you do your reporting? How did you get some of the quotes in the story, which are pretty honest when you go back and you really have to work with a source to get them, I think, to talk honestly, to feel comfortable enough to share some of the information that you gleaned for this series. Jason, how did you do that?
Well, I've been covering the school. You guys hear me okay? Yeah. I've been covering schools for 3 years, like you said, and it's, yeah, it can be hard to get into schools, especially depending on what that school's kind of previous history has been with reporters. If they feel like, you know, the Times has not been fair to their school in the past, you know, didn't cover them for various things that can be difficult. Is that me? Okay. But I find that, well, I mean, first of all, as reporters, we have the right to be on campus. I mean, we can't force people to talk to us, but as reporters, we have the right to be there, and that's something that some principals and some administrators sometimes have a hard time wrapping their mind around. But we eventually got places we needed to go. I find with sources being as honest with them as you can from the beginning is the best way to get them to trust you, especially for stuff like this. A lot of times I would go to a principal or a teacher and say, this is kind of what I'm looking at, these are some of the scores that we've seen, and they would say, that's very interesting, like how come I haven't seen those scores, like why am I getting this information from you? And so it's kind of it can be a kind of like a mind-blowing experience, I guess, but once you walk them through it, I think the people that felt, I'm going to feel that you're being upfront with them will generally return the courtesy.
An editorial in the Los Angeles Times, I think, following the series, reported that the LA Unified has long had this data, and that the district itself has never used it to, what's the word?
Make any decisions?
Thank you. Make any decisions about teachers. It was a battle getting the data from LA Unified, and then Doug crunched the numbers. But what about, Jason, the actual identification of teachers, which has probably been the most controversial part of the series?
Yeah. This was one of the hardest things about this series, was the debate internally within the newsroom that happened over the course of a year about what to do with this information once we got it. So the reason we got the data from the school district is because under the law, the school district concluded that it was public record information that the public has a right to know. And so that's why we were given the data, and after we analyzed it, what we found in the data was some pretty stark conclusions something that probably won't surprise you guys, but that is something that's really not talked about much in education, which is two teachers in the same school teaching the same type of kids, the same curriculum, oftentimes have dramatically different results. Some kids with certain teachers do really well and make incredible gains, and other students with a teacher just down the hall really don't show us much progress at all. And the conclusion that the data was presenting was that has not as much to do with who the kids are in the individual classrooms. It has to do with how good those teachers are at their job. And it's something that, not just in Los Angeles and California, but across the country, has been really taboo to talk about. Quality of teaching is not something that we've been offered a window into as the public. You guys see it every day because you know who the more effective and less effective teachers are. But oftentimes your parents don't have much access to information about that. So this data gave us a window, and admittedly a narrow window, into that question. Who are the most effective teachers and the least effective? And it only looked at one kind of specific thing, which is how do you guys do on the standardized tests you take every year compared to how you did last year. So if last year you were in the 60th percentile relative to your peers, this year maybe you jumped up to the 70th percentile relative to your peers. So that bump that you got over your prior performance, the complicated statistics are an attempt to isolate the impact of each individual teacher. So we had this information, we saw that there were stark differences between teachers, and the question we then faced was, what do we do with this information? We can write our stories, and we can, when we wrote the stories, we had a decision to face, which is, do we name, we can see that in some schools there are highly effective teachers and highly ineffective teachers on this measure. Do we name them? Do we name names and say, this teacher really isn't doing that well, and this teacher really is doing well? And then with the rest of the data, obviously in a story we only named 3 or 4 teachers, but we've got data on 6,000, roughly a third of all elementary school teachers. What do we do with that information? How do we balance the right to privacy that those teachers have? These are not public officials, they're not politicians who ran for office. They don't expect to have some evaluation of them put out there in public and made public. And that's a reasonable expectation on their part. On the other hand, you guys have a constitutional right to a fair and equitable education under the California Constitution. And we as taxpayers have a right to have some sense of how our publicly funded schools are doing. And parents have a right to make sure. So this was the balance that we had to weigh, and we weighed it for a long time and very carefully. And we had a kind of robust debate inside the newsroom about whether it was fair to name names in the database and in the stories. And what we concluded in the end was that the information was reliable. It was telling us something that when we took it out in the field and talked to parents and other teachers and principals and students, they indicated to us that this was actually telling us something that was true, that the teachers that this data was identifying as really highly effective teachers were what we would agree would be highly effective teachers, and the opposite too. So we felt like the information was reliable and provided important information.